I'm Willie Geist.
And I'm Mark Halperin. With all due respect to one of our previous times together, we're hoping this one is a little bit more intimate.
Mark Halperin is aboard a Delta flight somewhere over the United States. Mark, what are we doing here, my man? Are you really in the can?
This is your captain speaking. Sit back, relax, and buckle up because we're expecting some turbulence tonight, especially for Donald Trump. Maybe. Controversy swirls around Trump like dust all around Pigpen, but the last couple days have been more like a sandstorm. There was this story about Trump supposedly pretending to be his own publicist, which he denied last week. There are the ongoing questions about why he won't release his tax returns. And out this weekend, a lengthy New York Times story purporting to show Trump's improper behavior towards women. Any one of these slaps would consume a normal presidential campaign, and rivals would pounce on all the negative headlines. But Trump has largely been on offense on all of this, and the Clinton campaign has gone silent, at least when it comes to that New York Times story. Also benefiting Trump today is a woman named Roanne Brewer Lane. She was quoted in the lead anecdote of the Times piece and has been making the rounds on cable networks denouncing the story as misleading.
I was not happy with the way that the article was written, and I was promised that it wouldn't be done that way, and it absolutely was. I don't think it was fair to me, and I don't really think it's fair to him. It seems to me like they must have some sort of agenda. We had a great relationship. I just really felt like that they misled me into that the entire time, into that article, and that it was almost a trap.
All right, so Willie, we got these flaps now over this New York Times story alleging improper behavior by Trump, the tax return thing, the question of PR fakery. Are these stories going to linger and damaging to Trump, or are they just going to fade away as some Trump things do?
Before I answer your question, important detail to add to this conversation. Roanne Lane, once married to the late Janie Lane, lead singer of Warrant.
That will come up, obviously, in the context of this.
She's my cherry pie. Yeah. Okay, so on the one hand, what you have here is a series of stories between John Miller and the New York Times story about women that reinforces what most people already think or know about Donald Trump. I don't know if there was a huge surprise in there. This is not... I'm not advocating what he did in these pieces, but people think they know these things about him. It's sort of baked into the cake. On the other hand, if you look at the autopsy, as I did, which is a window into my social life, of the 2012 presidential campaign, they said explicitly, minorities and women, we have to win them or we have no chance, right? We cannot repeat Romney. We certainly can't do worse. We have to do much better. So that story for an independent voter, the New York Times story, if that influences a handful of women, they can't just afford to not lose women. They have to gain women if he wants to be president.
That story had lots of accusations in it. This one woman has come forward and said this story, her account was treated in a misleading way. But there are other accusations in it that would need to be taken seriously, involving particularly the workplace. But the Clinton campaign has been silent. If you said Donald Trump was hit with a huge megaton New York Times story about Trump and women, you'd expect there to be lots of Clinton surrogates out there. Silence today. Presumably because they don't want to engage in discussions of people's personal pasts. And I think Trump is on an offense, not on the tax returns. The Clinton people have hit him on that. The PR thing, to me, has surprisingly disappeared. Now, maybe when Trump's asked about it again and he has to address directly whether he ever did that, which he's admitted in the past, it'll come back. But this women thing is just hugely complicated because if the Clinton people don't make a big deal of it and none of the women speak out reinforcing the story, where does it go?
And they're clearly concerned about what he does next, which to me is the big question, right? Will Donald Trump go from putting out Roanne, as he did today, which is a perfectly reasonable thing to do, and she says they took me out of context, to making that leap to Bill Clinton? And will independent voters, will people voting in a general election say, wait a minute, Bill Clinton's indiscretions do not reflect on Hillary Clinton? Some people believe they do. But will he overreach in the case of this women's story?
Yeah. I mean, the reality for Trump is, like, he can go on offense. There's not a story that's come out about him, even the most damaging. When he was fighting with Megyn Kelly, when he was fighting with John McCain, he will go on offense no matter what. Hillary Clinton is more like a typical candidate. When something bad's happening, she tries to stay out of it. Trump just runs into it.
I watched this show enough to know the bell means 1 more minute left. But I'm going to keep pushing ahead anyway.
Just for fun, go forward.
Speaking of the Clintons, this weekend brought back the old 2-for-1 special. On the stump in Kentucky yesterday, Hillary Clinton said that if elected, she'd take advantage of her husband's economic wizardry.
My husband, who I'm going to put in charge of revitalizing the economy because, you know, he knows how to do it. And especially in places like coal country and inner cities and other parts of our country that have really been left out.
And here's what Secretary Clinton said today when asked about the former president on a rope line in Bowling Green, Kentucky.
I think we know a little bit about how to create jobs. I think my husband did a heck of a job creating jobs back in the 90s.
As we know from a remarkable New York Times story today by Patrick Healy, Trump plans to bring up the former president's infidelities during the presidential debates this fall with the world watching. Mark, given that Hillary Clinton is now talking about her husband on the trail, how is Bill Clinton's role shaping up as a factor for both sides in the general?
Well, when she raised the notion of him working on the economy, like there was tremors all over the place. Some people said, great, fantastic. Other people said, that just seems weird for her to make such a specific claim and almost offer him a job. I think it hangs in the balance here. Bill Clinton has proven he can walk through negative stories, obviously, when he was a candidate, when he was president. Right now, when he's out there, he's not very high profile. Trump is going to put him front and center. And it's going to be incumbent upon Hillary Clinton to respond. Trump is going to say, you were not the victim here. You were a co-conspirator. Right. How is Bill Clinton going to handle it? There are people around Bill Clinton who are worried. I would say, in at least some cases, I would say terrified that he is not going to handle this well, that it's going to get inside his head, and that Trump is going to be a master of psyops. Not just with Hillary Clinton, who can handle it better, but with her husband.
Trump made the point that you just made in the Patrick Healy New York Times story today, which is that you can't just go out and throw slime at Hillary Clinton about Bill Clinton. There has to be a strategy to it, and it has to reflect on her in some way. That'll be up to him to figure out how to twist that. But to me, the most remarkable thing about that story we were talking about a minute ago is that Donald Trump came out and announced 5 months, is it, ahead of the first debate?
Right.
The strategy for the first debate, which is to throw all this stuff at her on that stage.
And part of that is recklessness or carelessness or just Trump being Trump. But part of it is a calling card of psyops. Trump knows how to deal with these things. I've talked to him throughout this campaign, mostly about the Republicans and what he was going to say about them. And he just gets it. He gets the way the media cycle works, what he can do on Twitter. And as he has said accurately on this stuff, he has just begun. That Pat Healy story suggests he is going to game it out. Some of his people would like him to hold off and do this stuff a little later. He's going for it now. And this story today about him, if the Clintons say a word about it, it'll all happen in real time. All right, let's go back now. Stay with Trump. As controversies continue to swirl around him, many Republicans are going to be asked between now and the November election to weigh in on his various statements and the things he does. An abject lesson on how those efforts might go came this weekend when the chairman of the Republican National Committee, Reince Priebus, was asked on Sunday shows about a host of bad headlines for his party's presumptive nominee, including, again, about that New York Times story about Trump and women.
They say they found repeated instances of Trump insulting women and making unwanted advances, even in the workplace. Chairman Priebus, does that bother you?
Well, you know, a lot of things bother me, Chris. I've got to tell you, I think that all these stories that come out, and they come out every couple weeks, people just don't care. Well, look, I'm not saying people don't care about it.
Do you have any doubts in your mind about Trump's relationship with women, about the way he talks about women?
I think that, you know, as Christians judging each other, I think is problematic. I think it's when people live in glass houses and throw stones is when people get in trouble.
Whoa, all right. Priebus had equally squirmy answers when he was asked about stories of Trump's PR role-playing and the refusal to release his tax return. So, Willie, were the chairman's weekend answers a sign of problems to come for him and people in the party at large?
Let me provide the subtext for Chairman Priebus's answer on all those. What the hell do you want from me here, guys? I'm going along for the ride, too. I'm holding on for dear life. This is a guy who doesn't know what's around the next corner. He said, do you really think Donald Trump is listening to me? Do you really think he's listening to the alleged establishment? Has he listened for the last year? Do you really think he's going to listen for the next 6 months? They're like a basketball defender just waiting to see what Trump's next move is. He doesn't have any control over this process.
No, and then the answers he gave, as squirmy as they were, and as uncomfortable as they were, that's the best anybody can do. All they can say is the public doesn't care about this. They want this election to be about other stuff. I do think if Trump can reach an agreement with them on a few economic principles to talk about, lower taxes, less government, some things that they can say, well, we want this to be about middle-class families, whatever. I think that would give people safe harbor. But because it's not clear what Trump's going to be running on in terms of policy, about the economy at least. That's all he can say. But man, Reince Priebus has staff. He gets briefed. He got all these members of Congress, governors, dog catchers in the Republican Party. How are they going to answer for him?
I don't know. I wish I knew. None of us has been able to answer for a year. But do you think that Paul Ryan, Reince Priebus, all the people that met with Donald Trump last week were able to inject some, humility is not the word, sanity is not the word, but some normalcy into him where he could just say, just behave a little bit like a normal politician?
I think they planted the seed, but the tree has not grown yet. Yes. Not even a little sprout.
All right, when we come back, does President Obama help or hurt Hillary Clinton when he attacks Donald Trump? We're going to look at his Rutgers commencement speech yesterday after these words from Mark's sponsors.
Politicians have been polishing up their inspirational speeches this graduation season, but President Obama used at least part of his remarks at Rutgers University yesterday in New Jersey to try out some general election messaging, though he didn't call out Donald Trump or any of his pseudonyms, at least not by name.
In politics and in life, ignorance is not a virtue. It's not cool to not know what you're talking about. That's not keeping it real or telling it like it is. That's not challenging political correctness. Isolating or disparaging Muslims, suggesting that they should be treated differently when it comes to entering this country. That is not just a betrayal of our values. That's not just a betrayal of who we are. It would alienate the very communities at home and abroad who are our most important partners in the fight against violent extremism.
President Obama is, of course, expected to be one of Hillary Clinton's staunchest advocates in the general election. But, Willie, does it help her cause when he goes after Donald Trump that way?
First of all, he was in full White House Correspondents' Dinner mode at that. Feeling the room, laughing at his own jokes, the dramatic pauses, the whole thing. Does he help or does he hurt? I would say when President Obama comes out during a Republican primary, it helps Donald Trump because he can point this guy. This is the guy we're running against. This is the reason we're all here. But in a general election, President Obama is a relatively popular guy. Despite all the things that Donald Trump can say about the economy, he's not underwater. He's 52, 53% in Gallup approval rating. So I think on the whole, I think President Obama helps Hillary.
I do too, and I think he's going to be a great credible force along with Joe Biden, along with Bill Clinton and the current First Lady, in turning out Democratic-based voters and some independents. I do think, and I didn't think this until this weekend when I watched that speech, I do think that she is going to have to do this herself. And I think to some extent, if you're out there with your major surrogates being two of the great politicians of all time, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, people talk about overshadowing. I think she needs to find the same voice he has. And the contrast is pretty stark. Even when he's not mentioning Trump by name, he's just framing it better than her. And I think that it's not a problem for her, but I think it does show the level she needs to get at least closer to.
And whether she likes it or not, he's out to protect his legacy, so he's going to be out there. I agree with you on that point. I thought that actually the clip we showed a minute ago, where she said, I'm going to put Bill Clinton out to run the economy. One of my first thoughts was, shouldn't you be out running the economy instead of leaning on these guys so heavily?
And I'll just say one more thing, because we got to move. He does it with humor. She has to learn to do it with humor. And when she does it now, she's being kind of aggressive, but not that funny.
When it comes to the Veep stakes, a lot of names being thrown around right now. Let's talk about one of them, former Defense Secretary Bob Gates, who went on CBS's Face the Nation this weekend and was asked if he'd ever consider working for a Donald Trump administration. Let's just say his answer was something short of Sherman-esque.
I learned a long time ago never to say never, but let's just say that would be inconceivable to me. I think there would have to be a conversation with the candidate.
Gates went on to say he was initially unwilling to work for then-President-elect Obama before the two met privately and discussed a number of issues, including Afghanistan, the defense budget, and what kind of team he would hire. So, Mark, based on Gates' answer yesterday, do you believe he's open, maybe just a little bit, to running with Trump?
I do, and I've thought for a while that if Donald Trump could get Bob Gates to be his running mate, his chances of winning would go up dramatically, and therefore, why not go for it? Look, Bob Gates hasn't worked in the government for a long time. He's been called back by at least the last two presidents, well beyond when he wanted to be in public service. And the fact that he said never say never, even though he's been a critic of Trump at times, even though he respects Hillary Clinton, to me, that was practically like a want ad. That was practically like saying, anybody got a job for me? I'm exaggerating, but I think he's open to it. And I think if Trump could get him, again, change the race overnight.
Conventional wisdom is that Trump has to go younger, has to go more diverse, probably to offset some of his flaws. On the other hand, Donald Trump needs somebody who shows he's got a steady hand on the wheel. If you have concerns about Donald Trump having the nuclear codes,
particularly national security steadiness,
you have fewer concerns about Bob Gates having the nuclear codes.
You know, when people talk about maybe he should pick Newt Gingrich, I think Chris Christie's, my instinct is Chris Christie's high on the list. Those guys bring some stuff to the ticket, but they do not bring, for a lot of people, a sense of stability. And I think the thought of Trump picking somebody like that could hurt his chances rather than help his chances. I think Gates helps his chances a lot if he can get them. All right, up next, the great Dan Balz of the Washington Post. He's got a news story about some nail biting that's going on in Clinton world. We'll talk more about that and more after this tiny little mini break. Joining us now, the Washington Post chief correspondent, Dan Balz. He just wrote a story with Ann Gearan, his colleague, that looks at Hillary Clinton's shortcomings heading into the general election. It says, in part, quote, more than a dozen Clinton allies identified weaknesses in her candidacy that may erode her prospects of defeating Donald Trump, including poor showings with young women, untrustworthiness, unlikability, and a lackluster style on the stump. Supporters also worry that she is a conventional candidate in an unconventional election in which voters clearly favor renegades. Dan, thanks for joining us. Great story. Like most great Dan Balz stories, it both reflects the reality and will, I think, somewhat shape it, because it will worry a lot of Democrats who don't know, but this is true. What has caused the worry that is bubbling up now in Clinton world? Is it coming from their research? Is it coming from things they're hearing from outside Clinton world? Where is it coming from?
I think it comes from the outside. I think it comes from several things, Mark. I mean, one obviously is that Donald Trump is a very unconventional candidate. And they look at, the kind of traditional balance sheet and say this guy's upside down on all kinds of things and with all kinds of groups. And yet they know he has survived a lot of things that normal politicians wouldn't have survived or presumably wouldn't have survived. So I think that's one thing. I think a second is the degree to which Bernie Sanders has been able to sustain his candidacy throughout this long primary season in ways that I don't think a lot of her partisans had anticipated. And third, I think that they recognize that as a candidate, she is not her husband, as she has said, and she is not Barack Obama, as she has said. And they add all of that up, and they also notice, as Peter Hart, the pollster, pointed out, that on the scale of likability, which, as he said, is about the lowest bar for a politician to get over, her numbers are worse today than when she started the campaign a year ago. And so they add all that up together and they think, look, we believe, they say, that she is going to win this election, but there's no question that she's got real weaknesses that in one way or another have to be reckoned with.
So, Dan, how does she reverse that over the course of 6 months, something almost intangible like likability? How can she suddenly become likable and allay some of these concerns inside her camp?
Willie, I'm not sure that she can on some of these things. One of the people we talked to was Dan Pfeiffer, the former senior advisor to President Obama. And he said, I mean, there are certain things you can do in a campaign and there's certain things you can't. And if you have a kind of an image that's baked in after not just a year of campaigning, but, a quarter of a century being on the public stage, there's not a lot you can do about that in a matter of months. So I think there are a couple of things. I mean, one is I think she is going to have to do a more positive outreach, even to some constituencies that she ought to have in her back pocket. I mean, that whether it's younger women or independent women or groups like that, she needs to lay more positive things on the table. But I think another reality is that she's going to have to do the kind of campaign that, frankly, that President Obama had to do in 2012, which was find a way to try to disqualify her opponent. The Obama campaign went early after Mitt Romney in the late spring and the middle of the summer of 2012. We're going to see that beginning this week with Priorities USA, and there's going to have to be a lot more of that for it to stick. But as a Republican, has said to me privately, if that doesn't work, then she's got a real problem on her hands. So I think we're in for an interesting moment, an interesting testing period of whether she's got some positive things that she can put on the table that haven't kind of stuck yet for her, and then whether the attacks on Donald Trump have a different impact than they've had in the primaries. And we know she's dealing with, or he's dealing with, a much different electorate in the general election than the primaries.
Among the many remarkable quotes in your piece, Dan, along with Ann, is this one from a longtime friend and supporter of Hillary Clinton, says, quote, "She's horrible at running, but she's fantastic at governing." That's something that's been out there from people observing the campaign from a distance, but to hear it from the inside is pretty stunning.
It is, and I think it is a way that people say that we think she would make a terrific president if the Hillary Clinton that we know could be seen by the rest of the country. This wouldn't be a close race. I think people genuinely believe that who are around her, whether they're in an inner circle or whether they're in one of the various outer circles of Clinton world. But they also recognize that she has not been a very strong candidate. And they know that Donald Trump has just been unusual as a candidate. And he has an ability to kind of control the dialogue, to control the conversation. And if she has to be responding to him, which she clearly doesn't want to do, that's going to make it more difficult. And so they're looking for some spark, something that she's got that she can reassure them that she's going to be able to navigate what's going to be a very unusual general election.
Dan, I hate to use a sports metaphor here, but let me do it. Is she going to have to do something long ball here, or is she just going to be able to win this from their point of view by grinding it out?
I don't know the answer to that, Mark, but everything we know about her, and you know this probably better than I, is that she is not a long ball kind of candidate.
No, she's not usually.
That's right, and she is an incrementalist. She is a grinder, if you will. She's somebody, she's the old, if you want to extend the sports metaphor, she's the Woody Hayes 3 yards in a cloud of dust kind of candidate. And so I think that, it's hard for somebody to change the way they operate. And all of her instincts tell her to do what has been, over time, successful for her. Certainly it wasn't in the campaign against Barack Obama, but in general in her life, that's the way she has gotten ahead, and I think she probably believes in that. But if it isn't working, then we might have to see a change.
I know her people don't respect the notion of Trump as president, but have they grown respect for him as a candidate?
Oh, I think that they recognize that they're dealing with a very wily opponent. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And they're trying to figure out what's the right way to go back after him. What are his real weaknesses? What can they do to make it more difficult for him, for example, to begin to get a toehold in a place like Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, and certainly Ohio is going to be a battleground. What can they do in those states? What can they do in Florida, where they're going to start some of the super PAC advertising? But I think that this is still, in many ways, kind of a work in progress. I mean, they do have a primary campaign that they still have to run, and so in some ways she's got to concentrate on pushing forward and making sure she can get that done before she can really go after Donald Trump.
Okay, Dan Balz, great story with your colleague Ann Guerin. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Dan.
Up next, a Republican congressman gives us his update on the great GOP Unity Project of 2016. That and more right after this. With us now from the Cannon Rotunda on Capitol Hill, David Jolly, a Republican congressman from Florida, who, as far as we can tell, does not yet have both feet on the Trump train. He also is trying to become a senator from Florida, so he's got a lot going on. Congressman, thank you for joining us.
You got it. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So fill us in. Where do you stand on your own internal and public deliberations about whether you are going to be enthusiastically for Donald Trump rather than just for Trump because he's not Hillary Clinton?
You know, I'm not there yet. I do hope Donald has the ability to unify the party, truly unify the party by November. Look, my issues are kind of conservative issues. In addition to tone, it's suggestions that we can print money to pay off the debt or renegotiate the debt, suggestions of pulling out of NATO, one of the great security forces in the history of the country. There are strong policy differences. I did call on him to drop out of the race in November, and I had supported another candidate, but Donald won it fair and square. He's earned the opportunity to try to unify the party. I think you saw some movement on his behalf last week. I do hope by the time we get to November, we can have a unified party, because we know Hillary Clinton's policies, at least on our side of the aisle, we believe are wrong for the future of the country, wrong for foreign policy.
Congressman Jolly, it's Willie Geist. Good to see you this evening. What could Donald Trump possibly say in the next couple of weeks or months to you on a phone call or a meeting that would convince you that he's a true conservative?
Look, I have serious policy concerns. And so, yes, I would like to see those addressed. I mentioned NATO. I mentioned printing money to pay off the national debt. I have concerns about targeting women and children, bringing back torture, a religious test that I don't think is necessary to secure the borders. We should have a security test, but not a religious test. So obviously, I'd like to see some movement in that direction, but also in a very credible way. One of the reasons that I have withheld my support as of today is to really see who is Donald Trump in November. You know, to ask me in May whether or not I will support a candidate in November, not knowing exactly what the platform will be, I'm just not prepared to do it. Am I going to stand in the way? No. He's won the nomination of our party. The party should begin to look at him for leadership. I hope it's leadership that I'm able to support come November, but I'm not there yet. And I don't know if I will get there by November. We'll see.
So, Congressman, you've made one of your signature issues, something we've talked to you about before, the STOP Act, to try to create the, try to break the nexus between incumbency and raising money. Incumbents would still be able to raise money under your plan, but you wouldn't be able to, as an incumbent, ask people for campaign contributions.
That's right.
Looking at Donald Trump now, the presumptive nominee of your party, and how he's approached fundraising, is he a kindred spirit, do you think, on these issues?
So Willie said, what could Donald Trump do to get my support? I'd love to have Donald Trump endorse the STOP Act. It is right in line with this kind of populist movement that he is leading. The reason he's brought so many new voters is because he's saying, let's get Washington back to work. My STOP Act says members of Congress should be prohibited from directly soliciting a campaign contribution for themselves or for their party. A lot of state legislatures do it across the country. Judges on the ballot in 30 states are prohibited from directly raising money. The U.S. Supreme Court has upheld that prohibition. It's less campaign finance reform and more congressional reform. It says instead of spending 20 to 30 hours a week raising money, let's have a Congress that puts down the phone and gets back to work on issues like border security and immigration reform, balanced budget, foreign policy, transportation, tax reform. Let's get a Congress back to work. It's called the STOP Act. We've got a website, thestopact.com. I need the support of every American, but I need the support of Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders to get this over the finish line.
And yet, Congressman, you've only found 8 co-sponsors for this. It seems to me like the kind of thing, if they really were serious about campaign finance reform, they'd jump on board this. I think the American public listens to you talk about it. It makes sense.
Sure.
Why haven't you found more support there in the hall behind you?
So I joke it's 7 more co-sponsors than I thought we would have. But it's a reflection, a heartbreaking reflection on how little actually gets done up here. It's also a heartbreaking reflection on how money controls re-elections. Listen, I'm not judging or criticizing my colleagues. I'm trying to give them breathing room to work on the priorities they came here to work on. When I mention the STOP Act to them, they see the relief, they see the breathing room, they want to be helpful. And then you see the reality of big money sink in and they realize they've got to spend their time raising money. And their political survival relies on raising money. And so incumbents don't want to talk about it. We are starting a movement. When we came out with the STOP Act, I started hearing from people coast to coast, Republicans, Democrats, independents. A third grader understands, get back to work. Work on the issues that your constituencies have asked you to work on. And so just as the retiree in Iowa sent a letter and said, here's $5, please help get the STOP Act done. We need folks from across the country, but we need political leaders. Our own leadership in Congress, but the presidential candidates as well. Donald Trump, Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton to say the STOP Act is one small step we could implement right now, and we can then tackle the very complex issue of broad-based campaign finance reform.
Congressman Dave Jolly, man on a mission, couple missions at least. Congressman, thank you very much. Up next, why the Clinton campaign is being noticeably silent on that big New York Times story about Donald Trump's behavior towards and with women. Democratic strategist Mike Feldman, MSNBC correspondent Kasie Hunt on next to talk more about that after this. Our next guest tonight is 2 guests tonight. MSNBC political correspondent Kasie Hunt joins us from the Clinton campaign trail in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Here with us in the studio, Democratic strategist, former advisor to Vice President Al Gore, Mike Feldman. Thank you both for joining us. So, Kasie, you've been out tracking the topic. We were sitting back here in New York talking about whether Hillary Clinton and her campaign are reacting to the New York Times story. And you talked to Hillary Clinton today about it in what Willie and I like to call an extended interview. Tell us about that.
It was not an extended interview, Mark. But, you know, she did stop instead of simply moving along and waving. I asked her about whether or not she thinks that Donald Trump has conducted himself well with women. Do you think Donald Trump has treated women well in the course of his life and business dealings?
I'm going to talk about what I want to do as president, and we're going to draw the contrast.
So
we're going to draw the contrast was about all we got there. But I mean, look, they don't want to talk about this, right? She wants to talk about literally everything else there is available to talk about with Donald Trump, which she did on the trail today, but not that one. That's one that they seem to be stepping away from.
So go ahead,
Mike. I was going to ask you. So this New York Times story, whatever you think of it, seems ripe for the Clinton campaign to use against Donald Trump. Why aren't they even mentioning it in public?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that this is something that Secretary Clinton or her campaign need to take on directly. I mean, over a period of time, people are going to develop a sense for Donald Trump, his history, his leadership. But I think the campaign is focused on talking about the issues that they think are going to be relevant to voters. I think that's why you saw them jump on the tax issue the other day, because they see that as a material issue. I don't think they're in a hurry to rush down the gutter, which is ultimately where I think the campaigns expect that this thing is going to be fought. But I'm not sure they're in a rush to get there.
Kasie, how much of this on the Clinton campaign's part do you suspect is the fear of that asymmetrical warfare we've talked so much about, which is to say, if they start putting their toe in the water of Donald Trump's personal life, here he comes back tenfold on theirs?
Yeah, aides that I've talked to today are privately saying that, you know, they've drawn a very careful line in the sand here about not responding to personal attacks. You saw that, or what they call personal attacks. You saw that with the enabler comments earlier this week. It got a little bit awkward in the room when, you know, women and children kind of standing around Hillary Clinton, reporters asking about that particular subject. And they're honoring that in their own kind of approach to Donald Trump at this point. I also think in this particular case, I think Mike's right. If they go too early on this, it's potentially a problem. I also don't think that they think there was a huge bombshell in this New York Times story either. If there was something that was a little bit more clear cut, you may have seen them make a different calculation. But it was a little bit difficult the way it was presented in the New York Times story to come through with a clean headline where they felt the campaign getting involved would be beneficial.
Mike, in 2008 campaign, John Hamm and I reported that a lot of Democratic big figures, Harry Reid, Chuck Schumer, and others, were worried about Bill Clinton's personal life becoming an issue, and that's why they turned implicitly or sometimes openly to Barack Obama. In this case, the establishment has no other backup. They're not going to turn to Bernie Sanders. So how much worry do you either know about or suspect exists in Democratic circles now about possibility of an explosion of a scandal that will be around the neck of their nominee?
Look, I don't detect a lot of concern about that. Don't get me wrong. I don't think people are anxious or looking forward to what is ultimately going to become a very negative campaign. I think the Clinton campaign and their surrogates are definitely aware that this campaign is going to be no holds barred. But again, I think the Clinton campaign and Secretary Clinton in particular, I think her job is try to talk about what brand of change she wants to bring to this election, to the point that I think that you were talking about in an earlier segment with Dan. Make sure people find Donald Trump's brand of change unacceptable to a large number of voters, particularly those who are open-minded about the outcome in this election. I think that's where they want to have this campaign, not in the mud, not raising personal allegations about either candidate. There'll be plenty of that going on, but I don't think that's where they want to have this fight.
I was just going to ask you, Mike, you've been around these big campaigns before. If you were inside the Hillary Clinton campaign right now, despite all her built-in advantages of fundraising and demographic leads in important categories, how concerned would you be about Donald Trump as an opponent?
I'd be very concerned. But by the way, and I on your earlier segment about Dan's piece, I'm happy that people are worried about this campaign. The last thing they can afford to do is be complacent about this. Being concerned is partly how you win. Yes, it is asymmetrical. Yes, this campaign is going to be fought in states that Democrats probably haven't had to defend in a very long time. And it is disorienting, and I think it's probably a healthy thing for the Clinton campaign to approach it that way. They can't paint by the numbers in this campaign, but I don't think anybody, up to and including Secretary Clinton, thinks that.
So, Kasie, you're in Kentucky because Secretary Clinton's there. They're on back with paid media. She's spending a lot of time there. Why do they feel that they might lose? Because obviously they think there's at least a chance. And what do you think they think the costs are, if any, to losing?
Well, a couple things. Look, coal country is really, I think, the most fundamental answer here. That remark she made in Ohio about coal jobs still damaging her here. I also think, there's more registered Democrats here than registered Republicans, but a lot of those Democrats are people who are going to vote for statewide, Democrats down ballot, but they're going to vote for Republicans for federal office. And I think there's a sense in the Clinton campaign that some of those people may vote for Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primary when they show up there, even though they plan to turn around and vote for Trump in the general election. I think the consequences for them is a string of unbroken momentum for Sanders and an increased sense of resentment and anger from Sanders supporters. I think you saw a taste of this in Nevada, that the Democratic convention kind of went a little sideways because Bernie Sanders supporters were angry that it seemed rigged on her behalf. I think any noises along those lines and the more resonance that argument has with a lot of these Bernie Sanders supporters, the bigger potential problem it is for them going into Philadelphia. I don't think there's any real nervousness that they're not going to clinch this nomination, but I do think the road could be rockier if they don't handle it here or if she doesn't pull out a win here.
Let's say you were like Dick Morris and amoral and give advice to anybody, regardless of party, and not just a Democrat. Love Dick Morris. Donald Trump calls you, Hillary Clinton calls you. They each ask you the same question. What are your answers? What am I doing wrong right now? What would you tell Donald Trump? What would you tell Hillary Clinton?
I would tell Donald Trump that he can't win the general election approaching the race that the way he approached it. And I mean in terms of intentionality and strategically, in terms of running a real presidential campaign. That may work for a narrow slice of the Republican electorate, ultimately a decisive slice, but it's not going to work in a general election. He needs to get serious about the campaign. He needs to treat it that way. And for Secretary Clinton, I would say, and I think they've done a pretty good job of it, try not to be distracted. This is a long campaign, and ultimately this is about talking about what you would do as President of the United States. After all, the electorate is going to change from primary to a general electorate, but also the focus is going to change. People are now starting to look at these two candidates and decide what kind of president are they going to be. And she needs to remind people why she's qualified to be president, and to some extent paint Donald Trump's brand of change as unacceptable and potentially risky.
On your Donald Trump point, he views it almost exactly the opposite of the way you just said it. He gave that interview to the New York Times a couple of days ago where he said a baseball team that wins the pennant doesn't change the way it plays in the World Series. He believes the way he got the nomination is also going to get him to become president.
Well, look, far be it from me to question his instincts. They've been pretty good. Having said that, I think that's true to some extent. He can't completely lose who he is or how he's established a brand as a credible voice and someone who speaks his mind. But I don't think you can win a general election campaign for President of the United States by winging it. And I don't think that. I think there are people around him that are telling him the same thing right now.
Kasie, real quick, less than 30 seconds. What's the feel out there with the candidate and the campaign? Does it seem buoyant and optimistic, or between Sanders and Trump, they seem a little off key or off base?
I didn't get the sense that they feel off key or off base. I think to a certain extent, Secretary Clinton herself seems to be looking forward to running against Trump in kind of a competitive way. I mean, she's a competitive person, and I think people around her are saying that. I do think, though, that there is a wariness, for sure, about how this is all going to play out, and I think you're seeing caution in particular.
Okay, great. Kasie Hunt, in Kentucky, Mike Feldman right here. Thank you both. Up next, my conversation with the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott. We talked about Trump, the Lone Star State, and his new book. If you're watching us in Washington, D.C., you can now listen to us on the radio at Bloomberg 99.1 FM. We'll be right back. Earlier today, I sat down with the governor of the great state of Texas, Greg Abbott. He's got a new book out this week. It's titled Broken but Unbowed, The Fight to Fix a Broken America. It focuses on the governor's personal struggles after an accident that left him paralyzed. I asked him if he would have achieved even more had he not had his accident.
I have accomplished more after the accident than I would have accomplished before the accident. I tell people something they find hard to believe, and that is my life is better after the accident that put me in this wheelchair. I'm closer to God. I'm closer to my wife. I'm closer to understanding the reality of why we are really here. We're all here for a purpose, and that is to, in our own unique way, shape the world in which we live. I comprehend that purpose far deeper now than I did before the accident.
You and I spoke earlier today about the 10th Amendment. I want to ask you about the balance you see between Washington and the states. Now, the problems that currently need fixing in America that you write about, which of those should be fixed, at least in part, by Washington, and which should be fixed by the states?
Well, they should all be fixed by Washington, but because of the insider status, because of the way Washington works, they are incapable of fixing it, which is why the states need to fix it. But I'll give you the most profound example, which is kind of one question that you ask, and that is, look at the way the president is unilaterally rewriting the laws of this country. The way the system was set up is it is supposed to be the members of Congress who write the laws, yet that's not the way that it works. You won't believe this stat that is in my book, Broken But Unbound, and that is more than 90% of the laws issued by the federal government are never even voted on by the United States Congress. And so Americans are living under the dictates of unelected, unaccountable bureaucrats. That must change, and Congress has not shown the backbone to change it. That's why the states must lead the way.
So people watching this say, there's the governor of Texas. He's written a political book. I'm not really interested in politicians' books. Explain who this is actually targeted to.
This is targeted to the grassroots people across America who are fed up with the system. You see that in this presidential election, not just on the Republican side, but on the Democrat side also, because look at Bernie Sanders' campaign. You see people who are fed up with people in Washington who've been there a long time and cannot get the job done. They are part of the problem. The solution is not invented by me. The solution was invented by James Madison, Alexander Hamilton. They made clear at the very beginning the states have a vibrant role to play in America. The current Washington, D.C. has destroyed the role of states in America. It is time that we return power in this country to where it belongs, and that is the states.
You got a lot of constituents supporting Donald Trump. You got two prominent ones who are sitting out the campaign, both named Bush. Have you talked to them about their decision?
I have not.
What would you tell them if they asked you if they should reconsider?
Well, it would be presumptuous of me to tell a former president
well, if they solicited your view.
He or she do. But let me tell you what I tell my fellow Texans, if you would, and that is not voting does nothing but empower Hillary Clinton. We face dire threats and dire results to this country if Hillary Clinton is elected. The Supreme Court is at a tipping point, and if Hillary appoints the successor to Scalia and other justices, the Supreme Court will be beyond a point of return. And so sitting out is not an option. If you want to, if you don't want to vote for Trump, you can go vote against Hillary.
This election's been unpredictable so far. How do you see it playing out between now and November?
The way I see it playing out is that people are going to come to grips with the reality that Hillary Clinton is a worse version of Barack Obama, and they are fed up with that approach, and I think they will reject Hillary Clinton.
And so will Trump win easily?
I believe he will.
All right, I'm going to break the Greg Abbott talking points by asking you stuff you're not expecting now. Ready?
Sure, go for it.
Best tacos in Austin are where?
They got to be at Maudie's.
Maudie's.
But breakfast tacos. I'm a 24/7 breakfast taco guy.
Yeah, those are pretty good. The correct answer was Torchy's. Thank you for playing that. Uber, good for America, bad for America?
Good for America.
Yeah, anything wrong with it?
Well, I don't know the ins and outs of it. Here's what it does. It provides options for Americans, and I think that's a good thing.
What is the greatest movie ever made?
I'm going to go with an answer you're not going to expect. And I want to explain the answer before I tell you.
Just to be clear, if your answer is Austin Powers, I'm not surprised.
It's not Austin. It's not
President
Austin
Bush
Powers.
Like sorry,
because it's a movie that connects me with my daughter, who I love dearly, and who I used to go to movies with every Friday, but transcends generations. Shrek.
Shrek's pretty good, and it does transcend generations. Would Texas survive and thrive if it were its own country?
Texas will thrive even better if we continue to expand the Texas model beyond the borders of the state.
Yeah, but what if you seceded from the Union? How would you do?
Yeah. Listen, the reality is Texas is proudly a part of the United States of America, and the beauty of the way the states are supposed to work is through that level of competition.
I wasn't trying to trick you into talking about secession. Every Texan I know thinks they're better than everybody else in America, so I was trying to give you a chance to be out on your own.
But it goes with what Manny Fernandez said in his recent New York Times story, that Texans are super Americans.
Our thanks to the governor. His book, again, is called Broken But Unbound. It's out now, and we'll be right back. Check out Bloomberg Politics ahead of tomorrow's primary contest. Coming up on Bloomberg TV, the former CEO of Shopkick. Big thanks to this gentleman right here, Willie Geist, who co-piloted perfectly on his maiden voyage. How'd it feel?
Long-time viewer, first-time hoster. It felt real good.
You'll be back.
I'll be back.
You'll be back. All right, that's what we like to hear. Thanks for watching. We'll all be back here tomorrow for another episode. Big primaries in Oregon and in Kentucky. Until then, for Willie Geist, for me, for the entire team here at Eyewitness, same bad time, same bad channel. Sayonara.